I want to speak for a few minutes and then invite you all to ask some questions, because I think that everybody has different aspects of this big ball of wax in which they're more interested in than other areas. Yes, I was a police officer for most of the past dozen years. I was on the road in Broward County, Florida for 11.5 years, working for a municipality in Broward County. I worked as a police officer from age 49 to 60.
Which municipality?
Hallandale, the city. It's the farthest city south in Broward County before you get to Dade County. It's a very urban area. Like most of southeast Florida, it's a high crime area. It's densely packed, and there's a huge diversity in every single square mile in terms of any socioeconomic indicator that you might imagine. Everything from crime rates to income to wealth. To zoning ordinances and the way the municipality governments work. Everything is rapidly changing geographically as well as through time in South Florida. So my take on criminal justice reform comes largely from my background. I was a professional economist for a couple of decades. I worked for the federal government and other agencies for a long time. I was a free market advocate in financial services industries for a long time, had my own business. I taught economics at a couple of universities. So when I became a police officer as a second career, the first thing you notice is how little markets affect the management of police officers, as well as what it is that you're there to do, to take care of. I tell people all the time that if you were not an economist before becoming a police officer, becoming a police officer will turn you into an economist, because you see the effects of bad public policy up close. You see it in terms of neighborhoods, the cultural development of neighborhoods, and crime, where crime comes from. But you also see it in terms of how police are managed. Police are not managed like other businesses, of course. It's more like the way teachers are managed. It's run by unions. It's all, of course, in the public sector, or largely in the public sector. And everyone gets paid the same amount no matter how crappy a job you do. So it's a very weird thing. So the first thing that you notice when you're a police officer is that there's a big gap between your performance and what matters to you in terms of pay, promotion, training, criticism, anything, right? There's just a huge cushion between you and accountability. It's huge. And sometimes that takes the form of, no matter how great a job I do, it doesn't affect me. And sometimes it's how crappy a job I do, it doesn't affect me. The latter is what we see a lot of in the videos that emerge online. You see police officers doing what is apparently and frequently actually doing the wrong thing, right? And we're all frustrated by the fact that it's very hard to hold police officers accountable. And this comes from a couple of places that are very specific. Obviously, union contracts govern this in a way that makes it very difficult to hold police officers accountable. One of the things that you find in the union process is, gee, this would work a lot better if local politicians did a better job of holding unions accountable, holding unions to a higher standard in terms of what you negotiate for. In other words, every union contract has to be signed by somebody on the other side, right? This is not just a unilateral dictate that determines how to govern police officers. At some point, politicians have to sign off on this. And it would be a very easy fix to say, if all of our politicians avoided being captured by the political powers of their police departments or fire or teacher unions, if they would just do a better job of negotiating, if they had our best interests at heart, if they knew how to manage public sector employees, everything would work better. That is all true. Unfortunately, it is not true that most politicians are actually in it in a way that's in your interest and with a set of skills that would allow them to implement that. It's rare that a politician would have both of those. I find that most politicians actually have neither of those, an interest in your interests or a skill set that would allow them to impose your interests on public sector employees. So having said that, what do? It's not so easy. And I'd like to tell you one quick story. As you might imagine, if you're working for a smallish police department, depends on what you call small. We had 100 officers in our police department, so it wasn't tiny, but it wasn't what you would call big. If you were working for a police department about that size, and it came time to negotiate your union contract, and you were a former autonomous, you're going to get dragged into it, right? Even if you're not a union rep, you know math, right? So the fellows want you to be involved. This happened over a couple of 3-year periods during the 11 and a half years that I was working there. Most recently, it occurred to me that as a libertarian, this is a huge opportunity, because surely the mayor, in our case, the mayor's representatives, the city attorney, the people who represent the commissioners and the mayor, they're going to be asking for all the things that you would imagine a city would be asking for in the year 2019 or 2020, right? I mean, surely the mayor has a television and she knows what's going on, right? She's going to say she wants more accountability. She wants the city to be more involved with hiring, with training, with promotions. She's going to want more transparency in terms of holding people accountable. In terms of discipline, in terms of promotion. The commission is going to want all these things that drive police officers crazy, right? And when she says this, all the guys in my union are going to say, to heck with that, right? And this is going to be my big opportunity. I'm going to say, well, before we just tell her to go pound sand, why don't we agree to some of what she's asking for and ask for more money in exchange? I'm going to be a hero. Guys are going to make more money. The mayor's going to get what she wants. By the way, at this point, the mayor's been in the news, not the local news, but with her national cities group, what do you call it? National Association of Mayors, I want to say it is, something like this. She's very forward about, cities have to do the right thing and be involved with the progressive actions that Democrats are pushing for mostly. On the other side, Republicans are all about supporting the blue no matter what, right? This is also going through a period during which a lot of the Democrats were supporting the idea of defund the police. So you've got Republicans saying completely moronic things. You've got Democrats competing to say things that are equally moronic. Nobody wants to do the heavy lifting of reform. But she has made noises about how important it is that we reform. This is going to be a huge opportunity. We're going to get more money, I'm going to be a star, and our department is going to be run better. This is how the negotiation goes. We go in and we say, we want a 6% raise. The city says, we'll give you 2. We say 5, they say 3, 4, done, out. That's the entire negotiation. At no point, it's stretched over a month, but at no point does the city ever ask for the things that you would think would be obvious. The things I was going to leverage to get a bigger raise for the guys. And by the way, for myself. Not to find a point. Right? This is going to be a good thing. Didn't happen. So I start thinking, if the politicians aren't going to do the lifting, first of all, that's a bad thing right there. Let's not just skip over that as though we said something unimportant, right? The fact that our politicians won't do any of the lifting, I think, is really important. And we, as members of our communities, need to pressure them to negotiate harder with the unions for the things that we all want. Please.
Playing the devil's advocate,
Yes.
the people on the city side have absolutely
No
zero
idea.
training in negotiating, whereas FOP, IAFF, they go to all these schools national. So you've got somebody who has zero knowledge about negotiating up against these unions that these guys are really sharp.
Agreed. But the mayor is no fool. In many cases, the mayor is no fool. I don't want to argue blanket, right?
We had one that was terrible.
There are many who are terrible. But they can hire
Yeah.
attorneys who are not terrible.
Yeah.
If a local politician were to say, gee, how do we hold police more accountable? Because I got 15 people in the hallway outside my office demanding this. I can't even spell accountable,
Yeah.
but they want it. What do I do? Well, you could hire an attorney who's not a numbnut, for example. Another mistake our city made, they did not hire an attorney who was not a numbnut. They did hire an attorney. So they failed. To your point, although, respectfully, I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer either. I was representing the union, so I mean, it's a fair fight. Let's be honest. So where do we go? If the city representatives or county or state, right, are not going to be doing the lifting that we need. One of the things that occurs to me is that most of the guys and gals, we had a dozen gals on our squad. They weren't all guys, of course, and many police departments are now up to like a third women, which is, we can talk about this later, a huge leap forward culturally in the right direction, so we need to talk about that too. But most of our police department believed, we're going to talk about whether or not this is true in a moment, but believed that a lot of the buffer between their performance and accountability was caused by the fact that they couldn't be sued, right? We have this cultural belief in police work that says that qualified immunity protects us from almost anything. It's not true. Qualified immunity, first of all, it only affects civil cases. If you commit a crime, heaven help you. And by the way, you shouldn't be protected by some weird thing if you commit a crime, right?
Yep.
But qualified immunity only affects a handful of cases. The reason it's important is because officers believe it's important. And by the way, another reason why it's important is because communities, citizens, believe that it's important. The other reason that qualified immunity is so important is because it sends this signal to the courts to give police officers extra deference. I gotta tell you, and at the moment I wasn't complaining, but the amount of deference a police officer gets in court is enormous. And I understand you're always gonna have some of that. I mean, you've got someone who's trained, they're a public employee, they're a public servant, they're sworn to the Constitution, they've got expertise. I get there's a lot of reasons why you're gonna get some deference, right? But we're way overboard, way overboard. Almost to the point where a police officer is presumed, you know, rock solid gold. Very difficult to overcome that. In many cases it's true, so all good. In some cases it's not so good. This is the problem with qualified immunity. It's also a problem with the greater source of immunity in police work, which is the employer picks up the tab for anything that goes wrong. No one is suggesting that we want to move to a system where you'll lose your house because you made a mistake at work on Tuesday. That's not what this is about, right? Where we want to go is a system that's more like other businesses, more like other industries. There are other industries where there's a great deal of liability. Malpractice insurance for surgeons is a good example of a place where we don't say, well, doctor cut off the wrong foot, didn't mean to, so, you know, suck it up, buttercup. That's not how this works.
Yeah.
An honest mistake, maybe that's not a good example because it's hard to imagine cutting off the wrong foot and being an honest mistake, but mistakes that are really made in good faith. Let's not talk about criminal acts just for the moment, because I think everyone's on board with what to do about criminality. I mean, criminality has to be prosecuted, full stop. I don't even know what more to say about that. But mistakes that are made that are in a gray area, either just bad information, bad perception, something went wrong, I made a mistake, that happens, or you got a crappy attitude, you're a bad person, you're a bad cop, Maybe you didn't commit a crime, but come on, you gotta stop being a jerk. Gray areas that aren't quite criminal. These are places where to say to citizens, you have no ability to seek redress in court, strikes me as fundamentally un-American. And I'm not trying to say something bad about cops. Whether that's almost never or all the time doesn't really matter, right? You don't have to be anti-cop to believe that if something goes wrong, either because of a police department or a city or an individual officer, and you don't have redress in court, that's wrong. You don't have to be anti-cop to believe that, right? You could be a person who believes cops almost never make mistakes, right? You could believe that and still agree that when a mistake is made, you need to be able to seek redress in court. Or alternatively, you could believe that cops make mistakes most of the time, they hardly ever do anything right. But we would still agree that a court is the right place to adjudicate that, at least if it's something that is large enough that it can't just be resolved. This is another thing we need to talk about. Is it small enough it can be resolved with a supervisor lecture kind of thing, right? Hi, Officer Tremont was rude to me, giving me a ticket today. I'm not saying that's happened, but maybe it happened. And my supervisor calls me in and says, Mrs. Jones called, and she says that you were rude to her today. What the hell's wrong with you? Yeah, I was rude to her. Why were you rude to her? Well, because she was a jerk. She was rude to me, so I had to tell her to shut up. Okay, don't tell her to shut up. Now, get out of my office. We're not talking about that kind of thing, right? That's not a completely unimportant thing. We don't want to hire employees that are complete jerks, and at some point you got to be able to fire somebody. We'll come back to that. What we're talking about is stuff that should be adjudicated in court. It's very difficult to hold a police department or an officer accountable in court. But here's what's really, in my view, even more important, is that when you are able to get a city, a county, a police department in court, and something has gone wrong, the officer doesn't feel the pinch. The officer doesn't feel the pinch financially, because the city's going to pay for it. Maybe that's a good thing, maybe that's a bad thing, depends on the nature of the mistake that was made. I'll give you that. But because of the way union contracts work, there's no other disciplinary action either, typically. Nor will it probably hold you back in terms of being transferred into a great assignment or being promoted. These are the problems that I think that we could address by bringing more market forces in from the outside. So the big idea that I push a lot is replacing qualified immunity with a requirement for individual officers to carry their own liability insurance, instead of the city carrying it for them.
Interesting.
So the idea is to push down the savings to the officers that the cities would see by not having to carry their own liability insurance. Market forces would take care of that.
And in theory, you drive out a lot of the bad actors because it would just cost them too much. That's interesting.
Except how do you justify that if they don't have to pay for their own medical, why should they have to pay for their own liability? That should be part of their compensation package if they're insured.
Right, that's what they're going to argue for, right? Some cities will go one way, some will go another. Over time, right now, no one requires you to pay the premiums on your own liability insurance. For the following reason, if you keep your nose clean, you're going to make more money.
Well, then there's the other thing of what do you put as far as the limits on that? And so you could end up shortchanging a citizen who prevails in a lawsuit because this guy's only carrying $50,000 in liability insurance.
Right.
And if you go in after the city now,
Right.
He's
Which is the
paralyzed
same.
because the police shot an innocent man or
Right.
something.
This is the same, you're right, but that's the way it is now. Cities now don't have unlimited liability insurance policies. There's a cap on them. Today.
If you prevail and get a judgment against the city will have to pay for it. They'll have to come up with the budget
Yes.
and either make a payment plan or something.
Absolutely, and presumably the city will back up whatever an officer can't handle. And yes, you can bankrupt people. Surgeons don't have unlimited liability packages. They do have caps. So yes, to your point, a city or a state would have to require an officer to carry at least a certain amount. Same thing with automobile insurance, for example. You're not allowed to go below a certain number.